It was more like they were showing me sacred geometry stuff, and they peeled back this layer, and it was pinpoint lights. And they were showing me if you move these light points, this is what you have to focus on. All that geometry that everybody's wrapped into, that doesn't matter. That's a natural order of things. That just happens organically. But if you move these pinpoints underneath it, it changes everything. Hi, my name is Joe Kresoja. This is your superior self.
Oh man, that sounds so good. Jojo, thank you so much for taking the time, my brother.
Thank you, Trey. It's an honor to be here with you.
Sure. So you reached out to me. Let's give the people some context. You have some beautiful art behind you. Did you create all that art behind you?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's so fantastic. I like the one on the right, I guess would be your left. Looks like there's a young lady with some light coming down through her crown, maybe, but from what I can tell.
yeah, that one.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah.
Beautiful. It just caught my attention there for a second. Anyway, you reached out to me. We connected. You created a nice little visual effect for the show behind me that I've had in the newer episodes. Really enjoy it. Has some great energy. I was just fascinated with your story and how you connect with uh, the source of this artwork and produce it. And I want my audience to hear that story and what that process looks like. So, can you give us some context about who you are, what you do, and how this came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. But let me first say the reason why I reached out to you, this will tie into everything, is what I've been doing is I try to let inspiration lead my life now. So I listened to one of your shows in the past. I'm not sure which one it was, but the next day I was in meditation and said, "Hey, reach out to Trey, see if he'd want one of these." That's all it was. So after a meditation, I sent you an email. And that's how I try to give one of these away every month or so. It just seems to happen automatically. And it's to random people that I don't know because I prefer if I don't know them.
Hmm.
But there's an inspiration to do it. And if something comes of it, that's great. If not, hey, I met somebody new and
Yeah,
that's
man, we met. It seems like there's a connection. And like, so what was that voice? Like, was that who was that saying, reach out to me or see if I wanted one of these?
I don't know who it is. It could be myself because when it comes through, it seems like it. And something I've noticed is uh, if I ignore it, it just repeats.
Hmm. Is it audible? Like, is it like an audible voice or is it like a thought?
It's, you know, I would say it's both. Sometimes it is audible and sometimes it's not, but it's usually just a repeating thought. And if it's a repeating thought that I'm not fueling myself, like some people do affirmations and they keep fueling the same thought over and over. This is not like it's just like, hey, why don't you reach out to Trey? And then maybe sometimes it'll be somebody that it's like, oh, who am I to ask them to do it? And those are the fears creeping in. So I'm always like, oh, the fears are creeping in. So this much must be legit. Usually when the fears creep in after it, I know it's legit. Like, hey, maybe I should act on this because there's fear there. Because that fear is like my identity saying, hey, don't stretch, don't grow, stay put.
Hmm.
So
So the
that's it.
fear is essentially your confirmation that it's not you saying that.
Well, the fear is the confirmation of like my ego trying to keep me safe and not grow as, try to keep my identity rigid and in one place.
Hmm.
That's how I tend to look at it.
Sure. I mean, it's a great way to look at it. I think, you know, for me, it's the same thing, right? You start thinking big, you start thinking outside the box, and that fear creeps in and is like trying to keep you where you're at in that comfort zone. I don't want you to expand. I don't want you to do things that you're not used to doing. And what are the possibilities that may arise from that? Who knows? What maybe you're successful. I don't know. I mean, maybe you fail. But those fears are like trying to pull you back down to where you're at so that you don't explore those options. So you don't, you know, it's trying to keep you safe, but sometimes that can limit you, right?
Absolutely. So let me get back to your first questions of how this all came to be. The what I did for you, which I call color codes, is once again, it's going to sound like a repeat, but I was in meditation, and well, let me reverse that. It was during when COVID started. I was working as a artist in a video game company, which I have been doing for 20 something years. And once COVID hit, we all got sent home. So we worked from home and we always had meetings like the Zoom or any other platform. And then I started noticing when people talked, because a lot of people didn't have their cameras on, so it was just their name. And in the meetings, I would be sitting there doodling, and I would notice when some people would talk, I'm tuning in and I'd get these color flashes and these images, and they were just shapes, like round shapes, squares, triangles, but it was no definite things like this is a building, this is a person. It was just shapes and colors. And I noticed when another person would talk, it'd be different. And if I recalled that same person later in the day, those images would continue. And I was like, interesting. I didn't do anything with it. I was just like, yeah, whatever. And then maybe a few days later or so in meditation, those thoughts came to me again, like, what is this crazy stuff? And I said, hey, why don't you just do those for somebody and call it a color code? And then I had, all these things like, don't do that. That's that's hocus pocus. That's foolishness. Another part of me is like, no, dude, that's rad. Let's do that. So it was this double thing. So what I decided to do is just do a prototype projects, is what I called them, and offered them to people and to see if this was anything at all. And the first one I did sold after the person wanted to buy it. The second one I did sold. But when I was doing them, I noticed as I was painting up, stuff would come to me about this person, like things to tell them. And it was the same sort of voice that I was telling you before, like to reach out to you. It was that same sort of thing. And I went through a lot of dilemmas about that when it was happening, of like, oh, this is just me making it up, which essentially I guess it is. I mean, I could say, oh, it was this being from the Palladians or this or that, but it really isn't. At least I haven't had any confirmation from that, or am I looking for that? But same things would happen when I'd painted. All this stuff would come flooding through me. And I'm not a writer, so I didn't really write it down. I may write down one or two words, you know.
Mhm.
And when I do a piece for somebody, I send it to them, they get it, and then we have a Zoom call and I go over what came through. And what's interesting to me and what I really love is I'll look at the piece, a digital version of the piece, while I'm talking to the person, and all of it floods right back to me and new stuff. And I really don't retain the information. So if somebody asked me, hey, you said this to me 2 weeks ago, I'd be like, I'd have to go back and listen to the recording as well because it just comes and goes. But some things stick because, like, sometimes there's stuff I do not want to tell the person, and but if it keeps coming up, I'll just be like, "Hey, this is just coming up for me, so take it for what it's worth."
Can you give
And
us an example of that, right? Without naming names, but like an example of like maybe was it confirmation for you that the information that you were receiving was accurate?
there's two specific ones I can think of off the top of my head. One
Sure.
was I didn't know this person had children, and what came through was this person's daughter is going to radically change their life and all this stuff. And so I send her this painting. She gets it, and she replies back to me instantly saying, hey, I unpacked this, and it reminded me of my daughter because she draws these rainbows, and part of this had a rainbow in it. And so that was pretty weird to me. And I was like, cool. Another one was the first one that really spooked me out. I shouldn't say spooked, but kind of like maybe go like, whoa, should I say this? And I wanted to ask the person if their father was like, was there some major trauma there between them and their father? And so when I said it, they were like, no. I was like, cool. So I was continued on with the rest of the reading, and like 5 minutes in, they say, hey, wait a minute. It wasn't my father, it was my grandfather. And they went into this whole thing. So it was father energy, but it made me think maybe I should just say masculine energy instead of pinpointing it. But it just came through to me as father. So
Wow.
that was
It's
pretty wild to me.
so for you, right? I mean, that's just added validation to your work or what you're feeling, right? And so you
Uh,
said before that it comes to you in shapes and colors. So like, does the masculine have a certain color? Does the feminine have a certain color? Like, are they always the same color?
No,
No.
always changes for me. And usually what comes through is while I'm painting it, these little scenarios go through my head like, hey, this is about, this is about, and this will start flooding through me, but I don't retain it. Uh, if I was a fast writer, I'd probably write a little synopsis and send the person, but I haven't done that. I usually just speak it later, kind of free form. I find that's the most effective way for me because it's spontaneous and I'm not trying to like box it in a corner because that's what it feels like to me sometimes when I'm writing that stuff. It feels like I'm trying to overthink it and box it in a corner and be like, okay, this is what I need to say
Sure.
instead of just coming right out and telling the person, even if it's a little messy when I'm saying it. I feel that's a little bit more organic and free
Mm.
flowing for me.
Are you doing this full time now?
Not full time. I'm still painting my other paintings, but I'm trying to do color codes more and more often because as I do them, it's becoming the connection's becoming stronger for me, and the feedback is getting better and better as I do more of them. So,
Sure.
and I have a big desire to do color codes for a space, not just like a person. Like say, if you had a new business and you wanted a painting in your lobby or your office, and you wanted all this stuff to come into your life, we can talk about that, and I could do a color code around that. I
Mm.
haven't done that yet, but that's another idea that came to me in meditation. Hey, you can do that too. But I have not done that. They've all just been like personal color codes. And I have done them for couples, uh, but not like a piece together. I've done like for the man, for the woman, but I'd like to do a third one of them together. But
Sure.
in time.
So do the color codes tell a story? Because like I remember our conversation and I'm looking at it behind me as we're speaking. Like
I remember stuff about yours by looking at it on screen.
oh yeah?
Yeah.
What do you remember? Not putting you in the spot or anything.
I'm looking at yours on screen. The first thing I remember is you have a very strong mind and it cuts both ways. It can actually lead you to a very fantastic life, or it can keep you in a very hellish state of mind. So it cuts both ways and you have to be very careful. And the pink running through it is you need to embrace a lot more of the feminine energy, and to the lightest touch with you can move mountains. You do
Hmm.
not have to force yourself mentally. Just think think it and then let it go. It's more up to you about letting it go instead of rehashing it over and over in your mind. Like maybe this, maybe that, maybe this. You don't even need to do that. Things will come to you organically because
Letting go is the hardest thing, brother.
it
Oh
is.
man.
It
Like,
is.
have you ever just let go of something and seen the results from that?
Off the top of my head, I can't really think of something. I'm sure it will pop in.
But isn't it like that's the paradox? Like we grab onto something and we want to hold it so tight, but as we're holding it so tight, we suffocate it. It's like a little kid with a puppy or something, you know what I mean? Like we sit there and we
Yes.
hug it and we love it and we want it to be here forever and never change. And then we're suffocating it and then we kill that joy a little bit.
Yeah,
Then we're
and
afraid
it's
to
like
let
that
go.
analogy we probably both have probably heard many times about saying like you plant seeds and you don't keep digging it up to see if it grows. It's like that, especially with people with manifestation. Oh, I gotta think this again. Oh, I gotta think it every day, and it's like I know there's watering the seed, but there's also just letting nature take its course.
You know what's so fascinating about your work? You're literally bringing energy, vibration, frequency from the non-physical to the physical. Like you're literally manifesting, like taking, like going into meditation, like sitting in that vibe, meditating on the person and then bringing through that on a canvas. Like you're manifesting, like that's your process. It's so powerful.
Well, let's talk a little bit about when someone gets one of these. I actually have a Zoom with you, and I take you through a real quick meditation, and just for the connection. And the connection is, I say it's for me, but it's for both of us. And I ask you questions, but it's not a test. There's no right or wrong answer. And what I'm really doing is feeling, just feeling, and not labeling any feelings, because I find that very powerful if you don't label your feelings. Like, oh, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling anxious. Just forget all that, just feel. And I will, some people, the connection is instant. I've had some people, a few, that before we even had our first meeting, and we just decided they wanted one of these, it came to me, an image came to me, and I thought, okay, tomorrow we're going to meet. I'm curious if the same image is going to come to me when we meet. And the connection was so immediate that it was just like, oh, it's there again. I only asked her a couple questions, and for the rest of the time, we just talked, had a normal conversation. There was no like questions to make the connection deeper. It was just instantly strong. And some people I have to ask a lot more questions just to get them to let down their guard a little bit. Because some people are very guarded.
Sure. Now,
But
do you see these images like through the mind's eye, like when you're speaking to them?
yes,
Hmm.
and a
And
lot of the time when I'm not talking to them, like after I talk to them, just thinking about them, and I close my eyes, they start back up. And the images are never static. It's not like one thing. Oh, there's a big triangle here. It's like constantly moving and morphing, but there's similarities in it. I haven't done a person like 6 months later or a year later to see if it's changed, but more than likely it's changed because we're always changing. So I would imagine if I painted somebody's day after day, it would always be changing.
sure. Now, have you always been artistic?
Yeah, since a very young age. I mean, I decided I wanted to be an artist on a swing set in fifth grade. As crazy as that sounds. I was trying
Yeah.
to decide to be whether I wanted to
What
be,
took you off that path, man?
well, I was trying to decide whether I wanted to be a musician or an artist.
Oh, wow.
And I have an older brother that was into guitar playing, and I wanted to play guitar because, Eddie Van Halen, and that was the rage back then. And I thought, my brother's older than me, and there's this whole jealousy thing, and I don't want to get, beat up more. So, I mean, that was my rationale. I'll be an artist. And from that point on, I always wanted to be an artist.
Wow. And so how'd you get into video games?
Well, I went to art school after high school, and after I graduated, I just fell into it. I mean, this was back in the early 90s. I worked on there was a job for being an illustrator for backgrounds for a video game. And I was like, this is odd. I did painted backgrounds for an Inspector Gadget game way
Really?
back in the day. And it was a PC game, and it was strange. So I just fell into it, and I didn't know anything. Computers weren't what they are today, definitely. So
Now you're creating backgrounds for this simulation. What about
I like that
that?
one much better. Yes.
Oh man. How do you experience as an artist and someone who's very left brain, um, or right brain, I should say. How do you experience this reality?
That's a tough one to answer because I could say I see things like you see things, or do I? Uh, it makes me think of a lot of things because sometimes I see energy patterns a lot. I remember when I was a little kid, and I thought everybody saw it. When I looked at my room when I was a little kid, I'd see energy patterns in all the corners, and where the angles meet of the walls, energy patterns moving up and down and all around. And eventually that faded. But later in my life, like in my 20s, I remember after I got a massage, all those energy patterns were there again. I was like, whoa, this is trippy. That's a tough question to answer because I really don't know where to go with that. I'm sure what I'm experiencing is vastly similar to everybody else, but in the same token, probably about 30 or 40% different.
Sure. Well, let me ask you this. So what do you experience in your meditations, right? Like, do you have a process? Do you have a procedure? Is it like, is it aided by binaural beats? What type of meditation are you doing?
Funny you mentioned binaural beats because I used to binaural beat meditation for about, geez, probably for about 10, 12 years straight. And then I
Really?
had, yeah, I started that back in like, I think 2007. My girlfriend at the time got me a program. She ended up becoming my wife, but then I got hooked on it. I went through the whole entire program and then did a few more other programs.
So are you talking about Robert Monroe's programs, binaural beats?
No, the first one I did was Holosync, and then I did I think it's profound meditation,
Hmm.
and there was a couple others. I listened to the Monroe some of the Monroe tracks as well, but there was a lot that I've listened to. And then, like in 2014, I took a meditation course called the Finder's Course, which was an 18-week intensive, and it was to the term to have an awakening. And once I took that course, I really rarely ever did binaural beats again.
Because you had an awakening?
No, just because I felt after I went back to them, it felt like it was constricting me, like putting me
Really?
in this little path, like this is going to be the brainwave you're in, and it felt that way. Uh,
So could you expand your brain states further out, or I guess not so narrow?
I don't know. I mean, during that course, I did have a bunch of shifts. I think that's what people are calling awakening when you just have a shift in consciousness, and some of them stay and some of them go away. But what I noticed is some of the shifts I had, I would be in complete bliss for days. And this is interesting. At the same time I was doing this course, at the time I was unemployed and I was in between jobs. So I really went gung ho into this course. I was meditating 2, 3, 4 hours a day.
Really?
Yeah. And you change the meditation weekly. They didn't have you do the same thing because the whole process was about finding a meditation that works and only stick with it until when it stops working, you got to find another one. And so they had these greatest hits of meditation stuff from all the research that people had awakenings from. So what I was talking about was I had these great blissful things, I'd sink into emptiness, spaciousness. And then at the same time, my wife was extremely sick. And one of the things that happened was I started working again, but then I noticed I was super sensitive to other people's energy. Like if they were sick, I would feel sick. If they had something that hurt on them, I would feel it. And when my wife, when I saw my wife, because she was so sick, my blissful state would just deteriorate. Maybe deteriorate isn't the word, but it would slowly go away. And then once I was alone again, like walking to work or by myself, it would creep back up. But what I was noticing, and I think this is what a lot of people do, and maybe this will be controversial, but this is my truth, is I was hiding a lot in that spaciousness,
Hmm.
hiding from life, pretending that I've transcended the problems. And I think I did that for a good year or so. And I saw a lot of the other people in communities doing it that are into meditation. And that only works for so long before, the shadows really creep up and have you deal with them.
Yeah, buddy. So when you were doing those meditations, were you within a community, like sharing those experiences and
Yeah,
yeah, so they were kind of supporting you when you were doing 3 to 4 hours a day. What about when your wife was sick and ill, were they there to support you then too?
no. It
No.
was it was like an online community.
Okay.
We met online and we meditated and then, there were some group meditations you did or group awareness processes you did, and
Hmm.
people gravitated towards the ones that they liked.
But isn't that the paradox of life, right? Like, I mean, you always, as a spiritual seeker, you hear that we are not just human, right? Like we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And then when you get those blissful states of like profound awakening, then it's like then you have to deal with the real world, like you know what I mean, the density of that, the contrast of that. And I think that's the game, man. I think it's like as many books as I've read, and I'm sure you've read a ton too, it sounds like, and you've been on this spiritual journey for a while. Like we keep looking for things, and I want people to understand like there is a disassociation when it comes to spirituality where you just it's like spiritual bypassing where you just like I'm transcended, like I don't have to deal with this reality, I don't have to deal with the real world problems. And it's totally not that at all because like you're cutting yourself off from this experience. Like this is why we're here to experience this, but walk like what the Buddha says the middle way. And how can you be in this world and not of it, right? Is you're here dealing with the problems that you know, what you call problems, but you're also walking that spiritual path. And by that, I mean, like, you're doing the things that better yourself, that replenish that cup, right? But to also share that knowledge, to share that energy with others that are in lower states of like vibration or energy or whatever, and like helping them along too. But I mean, you definitely have to have your alone time. I do for myself. Like I have to do things for myself where meditation, running, working out, you know, biohacking, things like that. So that way I can refill that cup. But going back into life, right, prepared a little bit better, right? Like to be able to handle those situations. Meditation has allowed me to kind of be more aware of the conversations that I'm having, be more aware of my reactions emotionally if I'm triggered by something, and then kind of see the deeper rooted problem to that. Not necessarily a problem, but where that triggering is coming from in my body or from my past or something like that, right? And to really know that it's a reaction as opposed to me, myself, like the being that I am, right? Just seeing that it's something triggering in my body that's causing that. But to be aware enough to be like really do a deep dive into that and like honor that and not run away from it like I have so many times in the past. I think, you know, people nowadays in spirituality, and this is just my speculation is that a lot of people just feel like I don't have to deal with that because, like to your point, like where you were at, right? Just hearing your story, and I'm not judging or whatever, labeling. I'm just saying, like, seems like you got to a point where um, I've transcended this, right? Like I don't need, you know what I mean? Like, does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And I've done it myself and I see it in a lot of communities, especially, it's kind of like the dirty word with spiritual people is money. And you have the woke and broke crowd, you have the light worker, light wallet crowd. And I mean, some people will focus too much on money, but if you're a fully fledged, balanced person, every aspect of your life should be glorious, should it not? I
Yeah.
mean, your relationships should be great. Financially, you should be okay. I mean, you shouldn't be like, no one has to make zillions of dollars, but, and even if you're broke, that's okay too. But I think a lot of spiritual people they'll repress being broke, like, oh, this is the way it is, man. You're supposed to be this way. The Buddha said, this person said, and it's just repressing all these beliefs that they have about money. And
Yeah. Well, you know, I being the guy who just literally 30 seconds ago quoted the Buddha in the middle way, I think it's you know, you can go after these things, right? And it not be a bad thing. It's only
right.
bad or label, right? Like you put the labels that are meaningful for you, right? Like your labels are going to be totally different than my labels. My truth is going to be different than your truth. Some people look at money bad because that's just their truth. Some people look at money good because that's their truth. I think the key is just staying in that middle wave and not getting too attached to money, right? Because the attachments are what create other problems down the road, right? Not being too attached to different desires because they create more attachments. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like, you know,
Yeah.
finding your groove and staying in that groove and just kind of riding it out. Like, yes, we literally live in a society where you have to have money to do things. So
Absolutely.
why not just go make money to do those things? And if they happen, they happen. If they don't, they don't. But don't look at it as a good or bad thing, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's either good or bad because of your experience.
I 100% agree. I would just add one thing. That balance also has to be in the spiritual because it's really easy to fool yourself and say you're not interested in stuff when you really are, and you're placating it, diving into the spiritual and pretending you had transcended everything.
Sure.
I mean, if your whole life is spiritual, whatever that means to you, and you dive so much into it, that means other parts of your life are going to kind of like be lower. Everything should be
Mhm.
rising up together. I mean, theoretically.
Sure. And I feel like we're trying to, label things good or bad. Even like, our desires. Like, oh, these desires are good, these desires are bad, right? And it's like I don't know. It's such a like I can feel myself wanting to go down that rabbit hole and just say, all right, there are desire. I have desires. Every human being has desires, and they're like to going back to our conversation is the ones that I label good are probably because of past programming, right? And the ones that I label bad are probably from past programming. And it's kind of like seeing that for what it is, that it is from my experience, right? And not to be judgmental about that. Like if I really truly feel like full towards earning money with the podcast or for you, right? Earning money with your art. And that is a desire and it makes you feel really good about what you're doing and passionate and fulfilled and just joyful. What part of that is bad? You know what I mean? Like to me,
Absolutely.
and people are like, "Oh, you can't make money doing that. Like that's so bad. You need to do this. You need to do this for free. You need to." And it's like, you know what? I can't do the things that I want to do for free. I just can't because what I do when it comes to in regards to earning money, I put back into myself, invest in myself into the show, into learning more about spirituality, learning more about guests. I reinvested back into this ultimately, which then again refuels my passion and my desire. So what part of that is bad? And again, it just goes back to your conditioning. What do you label as good or bad, right? Like and I know we can like dissect that even further and go back into like ethical, unethical, but I just from what it is, just conversation, this podcast, I feel like desires, following your passion, and fulfillment are very important. And how you feel that, right, and how you discern that for yourself is always going to be through the heart area. Like that's the place for me. Like if I feel in my heart that it, I feel like my heart is on fire. I get really excited about something. Like I can't wait to do it. I'm going to go do that. And I'm not going to feel guilty about doing that, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. I feel the same way. A lot of the sentiments, I feel exactly the same way.
I mean, when you're doing what you love, like, I mean, when you're painting those paintings behind you, or you're doing the color codes that is behind me, like, I'm sure you get absorbed in it.
Oh yeah, it's the most fun ever. And actually, I have a lot of fun doing the kind of the intuitive reading afterwards. That's the part that I was most scared about in the beginning, but now I'm like, no, that's really fun because sometimes
What
I don't even
scared you
know
about
what.
that, though?
What scared me in the beginning was it's that whole trust. Is what coming through? Is this what is this? Am I just full of shit? And this person's believing it because I'm saying it? Uh,
Hmm.
that sort of thing. And am I making something up to make them feel good? These are the thoughts that come through. But when the same stuff keeps coming through, it's kind of one of those things of like letting all that other stuff go. And what comes through will come through. And I trust more and more each time that what I'm going to say is going to be relevant and pertinent to the person. And
Have you
so,
ever done one for your wife?
yes,
And I know that's a little, there's some biases there, right? Just because she's your wife, right? But what did that look like? How did that go?
it was interesting. I didn't really completely unravel it until much later. because I really didn't sit down and give her like an intuitive reading. I just like, she just asked me, what does this mean? What's this mean? And then when I talked about somebody else's, like months and months later, she's like, could you do that for me? And then I did. And it made more sense to me.
Hmm.
It was strange. And it was, I'd done a couple for myself as an experiment. And I want to do one that I did for myself much bigger because I liked what was happening with it quite a bit. It made
Well,
me
how
feel.
does that work, right? Like, I mean, you talk about self-doubt. Like that's got to bump up against that, right?
Yeah, but a lot of the things that I was telling myself when I was doing it were kind of like hitting the nail on the head as far as like not getting one of the, because I have a small one up there on the wall in front of me that is the one that I did for myself. And one of the big things that was uh, there's a lot of black in mine. There's a lot of like blackness in the middle. And for me, that is the void. That is like there's no identity, no structure. And I've had experiences in the void, and it's been magical, it's been beautiful, it's also been absolutely terrifying. But I have all this stuff on the outer edges of mine, and I sometimes tend to get too distracted by other things that are not really important in my life. And that color code was a big example of that. And then I started experiencing doing invocations. Like I did a color code about, I want to draw in some business. I want to draw in this. I want to draw in that. So I do a color code. And that has been interesting because I ended up, scanning it, put it on my phone, looking at it every day, charged with energy. So I don't even have to like think about certain things. I can just look at the image and be like, hey, this is what it kind of means. So it's like, it's almost like a little lucky charm. I look at it on my phone. It's like, yeah, that's right. Well, that's cool.
That is cool. I think yeah, the darkness, the shadow, like looking into that void and not being afraid to look in that void, right? And knowing that we all have that dark shadow.
Yeah, I will say I had a experience of the void that it both terrified me. Let me explain this for a second here. I was doing some certain meditation one night, and then everything went completely dark, dark, blackest black. And it felt good, like really good, right? And I started feeling expanded and then more expanded and more expanded. And it just kept going and going. And I was like, oh God, this is great. This is wonderful. Well, then it started feeling so expansive that it started getting scary. And then it was like, oh, I'm going to be annihilated. And I've read about this. I'm sure you have too. This is like the gateless gate. This is, and I just got too scared. And then everything went away and opened my eyes and I was like, oh, wow. Geez. And I was like kicking myself. I should have went through that. And it just felt like I had no conscious control to like force myself through it. So I was like, oh, it'll come again. But it didn't come again in the senses. I mean, like a week or two later, I was at work and having lunch by myself, eating at a park bench, and then all of a sudden everything went pitch black. And my eyes are open, and I'm like, oh shit. I felt real good, but that would happen periodically, off and on. But yeah, the void is very interesting because to me, especially in color codes, if there's black, that depending upon where it is in the shape, I can't really, there's no definite, but usually the blackness is to get you to stretch your identity
I'm trying to
because we
see if
tend to,
people can see like just what one looks like.
yes. And by looking at yours there, I can tell that there's that pinkness and there's that bluish purple running through there, which is your very strong mind. And you need the lightest touch. And that lightest touch is kind of stretching that blackness. So it's trying to just stretch your identity. And at some point, it may break off and it'll start again. I mean, see, that's the fear I was talking about earlier. When you're so afraid to do something, you're trying to protect an identity that you constructed yourself.
Hmm.
But you're all of it and none of it at the same time. So, you get to pick and choose. And it's that no identity thing. I mean, some people go into the no self, the non-dualism, no self, there's no self, there's no self. Well, granted, there may be no self, but it takes a self to say there is no self.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's those crazy things which are fascinating to, I think, myself and you, and many others out there, you know.
Hmm. So do you think that that feeling of annihilation was the annihilation of the self, the I?
That's what it felt like.
And what that feel like? You say annihilation, like a feeling of annihilation. Was that like what did
It
that feel like?
felt like I would be destroyed, and not only like destroyed and like my body's gone and I'm dead, like any memory that anybody had of me, my existence of ever existing is gone. Like once I'm gone, I'm gone. You wouldn't remember me. No one, I mean, there would be no record of me. There's just like, there's no Joe.
Hmm.
And that felt so overwhelmingly
Was it
fearful.
like, is that like fight or flight fear? Like, you know what I mean? Like you ever been in a situation where you're very fearful, like somebody's like you just have this feeling. Like I wake up sometimes like and I don't know what it is, right? Like maybe it's the books that I'm reading, right? About, energy or whatever, right? And I wake up in the middle of the night like fearful, like fight or flight, like there's something, I feel like an energy around me. You know what I mean? Like it just then I can go back to bed, but like what was that fear feeling? You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to,
It was terror. But what
yeah.
was really interesting about it, it was high intense energy. But once that whole wave left, I got up to go to the bathroom and I was laughing at myself because it wasn't like a nightmare where like those feelings hang with you maybe for the rest of the day, you know. It wasn't like that. It was gone 10 minutes later. And that's when I was like, man, I should have just plowed through that.
It's so easy to Monday morning quarterback, buddy.
Yes, it is. Yes, it
It's
is.
so easy. Oh, I wish I'd gone through that gate of annihilation of self. I could have tasted more bliss. Um, but yeah, it's funny because I had a dream last night where like I wasn't the participants in the dream. Like I was like the observer, like I'm watching the two characters in my dream just act it out, and I'm just kind of like observing in different angles of the dream. And I woke up. I remember waking up and being like, I was just the observer. Like it wasn't even like I was Trey in this dream. I was just observing a scene. Have you ever had moments of like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a lot of dreams recently where they just continue. Like night, one night will continue, and then I got like three or four continuous dreams going on. But it's a tricky thing. I can't tell you what they are, but when they happen, I know. I'm like, oh, I'm in this world. Uh, I used to have one that happened for many, many years. I was in some Asian country. I always thought it was China, and I was living in this high rise, and it was just, I would always go back to this place, and it was just really weird. It happened over and over, and it just continued. And one time I'd be in there and I'd get older, and I'd come back to it, and all of a sudden I'd be an old man. And then
No
my
way.
family I had
That's
before is all old, and my kids are gone, and I'm alone. And that's what,
wow. That is the first I'm hearing of that.
yeah. And some guy asked me, he didn't think any people can taste in dreams. And I'm like, no, I've had dreams where I can taste stuff. I mean, doesn't everybody have dreams where they eat
I've
some?
never been able to taste anything in my dream,
Really?
to be honest with you. Yeah. No. That could have been like an out of body experience for you,
Might have been.
like going to different realities or timelines, right? Maybe a parallel life or a world where you're observing, you in another life.
That's quite possible.
I mean, how trippy is that to think about? Like the many world idea, parallel universe, the multiverse. There's who knows, dude? You know what I mean? Like I would be so ignorant to say that I knew the answer. You know what I mean? Like it's just so fascinating to hear all the theories that are out there that could possibly be. Like I'm so wrapped up in like, people scoff at this, but like right now, UFO contacts and stuff like that, like just observing the UFO phenomena and what that could possibly be, and people hearing theories behind that because it's like it's everywhere right now. Like it's blowing up. And I've been following Jacques Vallée and his theories about the phenomena, and I can't, I can't, I don't know enough about his work to really say, like, summarize what he thinks, but there is something going on, right? And I feel like I don't know if it's, to me, I don't know if it's malevolent or benevolent yet. It doesn't seem like it's bad, but who knows? But there is definitely something going on that is trying to get our attention. Have you ever had any experiences with UFOs or anything like that?
Uh, well, I've had experiences with beings, whether they were extraterrestrial. Well, I
Oh
guess
yeah.
they don't live on Earth, so yeah, I've had beings visit me in my bed, and then a year later, when I did ayahuasca for the first time, they were there. Same beings were
Same
there.
beings.
Yes,
And what did they
exactly.
look like?
There was three of them, and I've always seen them in threes. And if I say they were hooded, I don't know if they were even, it was like a dark cloak, dark blue, but their faces and their hands were light, but there was no like eyes, mouth, there was no fingers. It was just light, almost like mittens. And coming off of it was all this geometry. And they communicated to me at the edge of the bed because I was in that state between dreaming and awake. Because sometimes I'd open my eyes and I'd still see them. Then I question it all later. Did I really see that? But what they communicated to me, like, this is my assessment after the fact, because they didn't communicate me like, Joe, this is what we're trying to tell you. It was more like they were showing me sacred geometry stuff, and they peeled back this layer, and it was pinpoint lights. And they were showing me, if you move these light points, this is what you have to focus on. All that geometry that everybody's wrapped into, that doesn't matter. That's a natural order of things. That just happens organically. But if you move these pinpoints underneath it, it changes everything. I thought that was really interesting. And then in an ayahuasca experience, they came to me and they were looking inside my body, like looking inside my body and putting their head inside my head, looking around. And when they came to me, then they were doctors. That's what I got from them. They were doctors and they were telling me, just chill out. We're going to work on your nervous system.
Hmm.
And they did that for two ceremonies. So I was like, okay, cool. Let's
So
rock and roll.
both ceremonies, there was the same beings were there.
Yeah.
Wow. So did the ayahuasca come before the bed experience, or did the bed experience come before the ayahuasca?
The bed experience came before the ayahuasca, probably about a year and
Like,
a half.
how do you sleep at night, right? Like you're sitting there.
Well, I didn't find it scary. I didn't find it scary at all.
Holy crap. Like I'm waking up now just after reading like Jacques Vallée's stories of just like the gentry in Ireland and like these beings that come, show up in someone's house. Like, and I'm waking up fearful at night, right? I can only imagine, Joe, you waking up like three beings like in hoods just standing over top of you. Like, what went through your mind?
Well, they were at the edge of the bed, like where my feet are. I thought they looked, I thought they looked cool, man. And as an artist, I was like, that's badass. And it was animated, like the stuff coming off it. It was so intricate, the geometry coming off it, and it was constantly moving. I thought it was, I was in awe. I wasn't like, this is
Really?
scary. I guess if it
Could your
was a
wife see
big,
him?
no,
No.
I see them at all.
Do
I was
they
like, that looks
indicate?
cool.
Yeah, yeah, that looks cool. Um, Yeah, I mean, I guess it's cool if they're like light beings, right? Like,
Well, most of them was like dark, but their faces and their hands were light. But I didn't get any like, I guess I might have been scared if they looked all freaky and scary, but I thought they looked beautiful. And, I think I'm pretty good at feeling energy off people. So if I see a being, I think I'm gonna, logic would say I'm feeling what's up them instead of me freaking out. And I felt fine. And when they visited me in ayahuasca experiences, I was like, hey, what's up?
did you have a sitter during those ceremonies?
Yeah,
Or shaman, I guess?
yeah,
So when the shamans go into the ceremony with you, are they taking the ayahuasca too?
yes.
And how does that work? Are they experiencing what you're experiencing?
Well, they're not seeing what I'm seeing, but they're on ayahuasca. I just don't think as a heavy as a dose is what I did at all. But one thing about ayahuasca that I didn't know going in was how integral music is. I mean, it goes the live music they played was absolutely astounding, and it worked. I mean, I saw the music visually, it was coming through my system, moving stuff out, and the first 6 or 8 songs were painful as for me, painful as hell, because it was just felt like it was shattering my soul in some sense. I mean, it was painful. It was like, oh, this hurts, man.
Hmm. What
But
did the beings like talk to you in ayahuasca? Like, are they just?
I had different being talk to me in ayahuasca that I audibly heard. And it was, the standard typical people call the grandmother ayahuasca. It was a female presence energy that talked to me. And first time I did it, she told me certain things to like take off some jewelry that I was wearing because I had some bracelets. She said, don't wear any jewelry like that unless you made it yourself or your wife. There's too much energy on there that's messing up with your nervous system.
Really?
And
Did you have issues with your nervous system?
oh yeah, I had really bad restless leg syndrome, really bad. And after my first weekend with ayahuasca, it was almost gone completely. I mean, now I don't have it at all because I've done ayahuasca probably about I've done like 4 ceremonies.
Hmm.
So yeah, each
Did
time it's different, but
did the
yeah.
beings come back each time?
I only saw those 3 beings that I talked about earlier in 2 or 3 ayahuasca experiences. But then I saw other things in beings. Like one was just a big a blue rectangle, and it was talking to me in the room, in this pitch black room. It was just crazy. And it
It
wasn't
wasn't like
when I
me,
say
was it? You know what I mean? Because like,
what's
where,
funny is it was constantly moving and the shapes were constantly moving, but its big base was a rectangle. It was the wildest thing I've ever seen.
yeah. Um, any
Something about
important?
ayahuasca I noticed is the first time the visuals were each time the visuals for me are drastically different. And I surmise that I've gone through different layers or different subworlds or astral worlds to maybe higher, because that's what it kind of feels like.
Or do you think those beings are from the higher worlds or higher realms?
Well, I guess higher or lower is kind of
It's
irrelevant, but
relative, right? Like, I mean,
yeah,
depending upon the experience.
I think some nasty creatures could live somewhere in some realm. You know,
Well, I guess the better question would be, do you think they're a part of your what people would call guides or spiritual team or part of you?
yes. One thing creeped me out in my first ayahuasca experience is, you know how they say people puke, they purge? Uh, well, I never have purged in the puking sense. I purged in other ways, but first time I'm doing it, I think I'm going to purge. So I grab my bucket and the bucket starts to fall. And I swear to God, this completely white hand made of light grabs the bucket and puts it in my hands when it fell and like straightened me up. And I was like, whoa. That's like the one thing that freaked me out in ayahuasca completely.
Well, let me ask you this too, because I always wonder this, right? I'm assuming you've heard of like Mother Ayahuasca before taking ayahuasca.
Yes.
So I wonder if that has anything to play, like in actually seeing Mother Ayahuasca in your ceremony. You know what I mean? Like people talk about, so I always wonder, like, what beings always show up when you have these experiences. Is it because of that the Mother Ayahuasca being actually exists on the other in a non-physical, or is it because we're kind of like programming our subconscious or unconscious before we take ayahuasca and they're showing up because we expect them to unconsciously, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. I thought the same thing. In fact, I kind of had a same thing with a lot of people see snakes, but ayahuasca comes from a vine. And the first time I saw it, I saw these snakes, but when I was really looking at them the second night of the first ceremony that I did, was I was realizing, hey, is that a snake or is these just vines moving around since it comes from a vine? But then in the end, does it really even matter? I don't know, but I thought that same thing that you're saying about Mother Ayahuasca, because a few ceremonies later, we did a 3-day one, which in the third day, they gave us Wachuma, which is considered, if ayahuasca is the grandmother, Wachuma is considered the grandfather. And that was interesting to me. I mean, it was completely different energy. And looking back, I'm like, wow, it almost seems like in some ways it should be flipped. I don't know.
Did you see a male entity?
No, not at all.
No.
In
Huh.
fact, it felt more feminine to me than ayahuasca.
That's
So I don't
interesting.
know. I don't know.
How do you, oh, man, there's so many questions. Well, let me just ask this because it's on the tip of my tongue, and before I forget,
Yeah,
like, did the
please.
beings have like an urgent message for you in your life?
No, what really came up for me in multiple sessions is I would ask questions myself when I'm in certain states, like what's keeping me from this perceived life that I want? And then what would flood in is these memories of events, and the way I think would just come rushing it, and it would like be showing me through experience of like, this is what this see what you're doing here, this way you think, that's what's in the way. This is what's in the way. And it'd be like that for hours and hours and hours. And then like the last couple hours of the experience, it would turn around and show me the positive.
Hmm. So like past traumas, past programming is essentially
Yeah,
keeping you back.
yeah.
How do you clear that up? Did they say?
No, there was no definite like, here's what you do, but
Maybe it's
you
just
know,
bringing awareness to that.
yeah, that's kind of what I was doing, is just trying to sit with it and really sit with it and be with it and just breathe, not try to change it, not try to transcend it, just really be with it, man. Be with it as much as I can. And I tell you, ayahuasca is really, it's a really difficult thing to do. And I don't advise anybody to do it in the sense of, if you're called to do it, but it's not for the faint of heart. It really isn't. It's like some heavy lifting.
I've heard like it's a rough process. It's not like this elegant, mystical kind of like beautiful thing where, you take ayahuasca and bam, you're sitting in the lap of Mother Ayahuasca, like, she's giving you the secrets of the universe. It seems like people that go through these ceremonies are purging or, you know what I mean? Like it's very violent, it seems like to me when I speak to people that have actually gone through ceremonies. You know what I mean? Like it's not
Yeah.
this magical story. Well, it can be a magical story, but I feel like it's very violent. It's like it's kind of like, you're purging, you know, you're vomiting. It may come out the other end. I don't know, but it seems like it's like a rebirthing process.
Yeah. What I found interesting about it is my body started shaking the second ceremony I ever did. Like once the music would start, at a certain point, it's like I was not in control of my body, in the sense it would just start shaking. And then once the song was over, it'd
Hmm.
be back to normal. And the
That's so
same
fascinating.
thoughts came to me. It's like, no, we're working on your nervous system. It's really messed up. And it was like that over and over.
Hmm.
So yeah, and a lot of trauma about, my wife being sick and me worried about her, because there was a while there I didn't know that whether she was going to live or die. I'd always check her in the morning, she's sleeping next to me, if she was gonna, her hands were going to be cold, like if she was going to be dead. So I had a lot of trauma around that. So that came up a lot in one of the sessions. Like I viscerally felt what it'd feel like if she died. Then I viscerally felt everybody I know dies. How is that going to feel? It was like the whole, 6 hours was all about death, and not just my own, everybody's death, like just death in general. That was a really, really difficult and visceral thing to experience. And it was very intense. Uh, some people may not want to experience that. I mean,
Sure.
I'm glad I did do it. I mean, it gives me a contrast reference point in normal life. When things go bad, it's like, well, this is nothing compared to that. But
Hmm.
it's and it makes me appreciate life a lot more. So there's that.
I mean, how has, hmm, that's so beautiful. You just said that, right? Like, experience life, I feel like having more gratitude for this experience. Like for me, for sure. We get lost in it though. I can tell you that. In the drama and
Too easy to do that. It's too
yeah, man. Gratitude. Like if you could sit in the morning and be grateful for wherever you're at. I mean, wherever you're at, like that's the key. I feel like, and people,
absolutely.
like people say, "Oh, it's so easy for you to say." It's not so easy for me, my friends. It's a hard ride, and anyone who says it's not is lying to you. This life is hard because we all experience our subjective realities, and they're very different, vastly different. And but if you can sit in the morning and you can be grateful for where you're at and for the people in your life, no matter what, right? That's the key. I'm not saying that
Absolutely.
happens for me every day, but I can get to a place some days, sometimes, where I'm even grateful for the people that are a pain in my ass. You know what I mean? Like
Absolutely.
because it's a lesson, man. It's a teaching. It's a mirror almost, right?
Absolutely. It's what it's there to teach us, I believe.
Mm. Joe, man, I I've been in flow with you because I totally lost track of time. Um, where can people connect with you? How can they reach out to you? How can they get more information about the your artwork if they want to purchase something for themselves? What does that look like?
My website's the best place. From there, there's a hub. You can go to any of my social stuff, and that is kresoja.com, KRESOJA.com. You'll learn all about my art, color codes. There's a place to reach out to me if you want to talk about it, to see if it's right for you, or if you're just interested, just reach out, say hello, book a call. We can get started and rolling on it. And it's fun, it's enjoyable, and I guarantee you'll learn a little bit more about yourself if you get one.
Absolutely, I can attest to that. 100%. Go to his website, check out his stuff, buy a color code, buy some artwork. I love that lady artwork behind you. It kind of looks like Mother Ayahuasca back there. Um, just hanging out, having some rays of white light through the crown chakra. Joe, my friend, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your work. Thank you so much for my color code. Thank you for coming on the show.
Trey, I appreciate you, brother. Thank you.